Good afternoon, everyone. You're here for the voice computing, the next frontier in learning panel. We're not supposed to do long introductions, but I just want you guys to know who is who very quickly. So I'm Shravan Goli, Chief Product Officer, Coursera.
Ian Freed, CEO of Bamboo Learning.
Chris Niehaus, Global Business Development with AWS Education.
Jared Stein, VP of Higher Ed Strategy for Instruction.
Rose Elsmitchell, Chief Learning Officer for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt.
All right. My only instruction to the panel is to let's have a lively debate. And so not a lot of facts, but a lot of debate. All right. So with that said, you already probably read in the description there are 175 million speakers, voice-enabled speakers, and about 55% penetration expected in US by 2022. But globally, by 2020, you're already going to see 225 million voice-enabled speakers. And if you actually think about voice-assisted devices between Android and iOS, it almost covers 1 billion devices already. And so there's a massive opportunity, clearly, right? But one thing I wanted to start out for this panel is, what is the distinction and how should we think about a voice-enabled speaker to a voice assistant device as it relates to learning and education and kind of, sort of the field that we deal with?
I can kick it off. The way I think about it is smart speakers are really a piece of hardware, just like your smartphone. And a voice assistant is typically the software that runs on a smart speaker. It could run on a smartphone. It could run on a tablet. And the voice assistants really are the kind of brain and power behind the experience that you would get as a customer. So our company builds third-party applications on the Alexa platform to teach kids to learn. And so we build that on top of the voice assistant.
Yeah, so I would echo that. I mean, a lot of people think of the Echo device.
No
pun
intended.
intended. Sorry, I didn't even.
We said we
that's going to be hard not to
the
do.
lively part. Yeah. Sorry for the pun.
Advertisements.
I'll endorse the comments. So I would say a lot of our customers, when we have this conversation, actually start with the Echo device, and actually that's one modality to engage with an intelligent assistant or virtual assistant. But I would completely agree that, especially for AWS, like all of the things that go into making a voice assistant, whether it's ours or someone else's, or for us are these decomposable or composable sets of services like a chat bot or the voice recognition or even visual recognition, all these kind of finished AI services that when you start working backwards from what a virtual assistant, what you want it to do and how intelligent you want it to be, you can start assembling those pieces together. And if they ultimately are exposed through a mobile phone or through a tablet or through an actual Echo device, that's great. But it is important to divorce yourself of just thinking of it just as a hardware experience.
Yeah, I think for product designers and educational technologists, it is important to think about it as a service or any number of services. That's better than thinking of it as a device, because you tend to have that mental model for what you do with those devices and how you interact with them. Whereas a service is something that you can use to help you solve specific problems. And
I think I'd say one of the ways we think about it as we think about both kids and teachers, and I know we're going to talk about the use cases in a little bit, is it's really, in some sense, just an interface. So as we think about all of the other decisions that we make in UX, and we look at the experiences we have with voice and that we observe how voice is used in learning, it really, I think in 5 years' time, we're going to laugh that this session was called voice computing, because it's really just another way to think about bringing up an experience or bringing forth information or productivity tools.
That's great. So on that note, sometimes as a product guy, I wonder, do we build things in search of a problem, or there are actually problems that exist and technology can solve, very specific related to that? So as it relates to voice computing, where are we in its life cycle? Are we searching for the problem as it relates to education, or are there use cases and some excellent examples that any of you can quote? So Ian, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's incredibly early days. I spent about 12 years at Amazon, and one of Amazon's favorite sayings is it's still day one. And so in voice, it's really early. And what I would say in terms of what we're doing at our company, we're building really simple activities that kids can use at home to help them learn math, to learn a little bit about music, or to help them read a bit better. So we're seeing some really interesting early signs, but we're in it for the long run, and I think you'll see tremendous innovation in learning on this platform. And I would think about it, Rose was kind of alluding to this, think of mobile phones like in the first 2 or 3 years. They kind of were really interesting, and people were still trying to figure out exactly how to build for them. And that's really, I think, the stage we're in with voice platforms, in particular around education.
And I think they're also thought of as separate, right? So a mobile phone was separate from the other kinds of phones that you had. And if we think of voice computing as separate today, rather than how it's going to become more hybrid as an interface with everything, you get away from the device and you get into, the classroom itself as an interface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would also say from an early days, it is early days, but it's also really fun and interesting to listen to where our customers are taking us. So for example, one of the earliest places for us to get engaged with Alexa in education was in higher education, actually in dorm rooms. And in fact, Arizona State University right here, the folks that kind of kicked a lot of that off, which was the integration of the device into both the student living and learning experience. And so we saw kind of that wave where one of the things that was interesting about the educational experience wasn't originally super focused on the learning, it was also focused on student productivity from a comfort standpoint and like knowing what's on campus. And so when we think about that virtual assistant, it's about the living experience. Can I remove barriers of a kid coming to school for the first time, moving basically to a new city and a whole new environment? Can I get those barriers knocked down faster so that they can actually start engaging in their learning and their social experiences easier? And that was really eye-opening for us, and how a simple voice engagement from a device could really help do that. Yes, it's early days, but the experiences, when done well, are really magical and can be very, very powerful. And to the point, like, we're just beginning, and we're starting to see the really great experimentations with now from student living to student learning, and then that bridge into sort of personalized learning and whatnot, which is exciting.
Yeah, I would certainly say as new technologies become more ingrained or more ubiquitous in people's lives, it's education's job, responsibility, whatever, to make sure that it's connecting with learners and teachers in the ways that they're used to working on a day-to-day basis. And this likely will be one of them going forward.
So Chris, picking up your idea about voice as a different kind of experience, right? It's more affective, which is, you mentioned, students felt more comfortable, right? And I think if you think about the different kinds of interfaces, really good messaging on a screen, really good button design, sure, it's fine, but I wouldn't say that it would ever get to a level of being, wow, I'm so relieved I pressed that button, right? So the notion of voice being something that has an emotional connection with a user, I think is a really powerful path for both teaching and for learners' experience, because it can bring emotion, and the voice assistants themselves will get more emotional, as will the inputs.
So just to add on that, almost every customer I talk to refers to Alexa as she.
Yeah.
Right? And my kids obviously think she, and I read a great article, I don't remember where, that talked about modeling, and that a kid at a certain age thinks there's actually a person in that device.
Yes.
And so if you're rude to the device, the kid will think it's okay. So we actually say please and thank you to Alexa all the time at home, just because of that.
Likewise,
Cool,
likewise.
yeah. but there is an emotional connection, absolutely.
Yeah, which is interesting. I was in the entrepreneur sort of the presentations earlier, and I saw a few examples. Ask My Class, which is helping support social emotional learning, SEL, on command. And so that was kind of interesting, right? They talk about self-managing emotions, helping kids self-manage those emotions. Whenever a teacher is not available, so if you're teaching a class of 30 students, and one student has some emotional issue, anger issue, Like, how do you deal with that? Like, so now I saw an example where they are not inserting an ad for Amazon, but it was an echo, and there's sort of a Q&A or some sort of a bi-directional conversation that kid could have pre-programmed by the teacher. And so that helps with some activities, there are some number activities or whatever that helps with the anger management. So I thought that was very powerful, like, because it's so hard for teachers to kind of be able to scale to individual levels inside the classrooms. But that was interesting and fascinating. I think there was the other Maslow.io, it's using voice, but they call it personified AI with empathy. So there's a lot that can be done as such. So with that said, what do you see, like, through your experiences and everything that you heard, what are some of the challenges from a product discovery standpoint, right? It's not like I can ask Alexa all the skills that you have. That will take I don't know how many hours. We sit and figure it out, right? So how do consumers and learners figure it out?
Go
ahead.
I was just going to vary make it more lively
Yeah,
by starting down here.
Go for it.
So one of I don't know who else works specifically in K-12 classrooms as you're looking at the use case, but one of the things that's kind of fascinating about K-12 classrooms is they're pretty noisy, so there's dealing with just even that around any of the use cases. But the specific one that we're looking at is around reading and providing feedback to students about their reading as they're reading text, and particularly early in reading acquisition, so K3. And one of the things that's really hard is that unlike all of us, even those of us with accents, little kids' voices and their mouths are not fully formed. So as they're articulating, it's harder, and so we have to work extra hard and use a lot of models to try and make sure we're capturing accurately the way kids are speaking. So it's an exciting use case because it's got a lot of value to extend the arm of the teacher and provide SEL while doing literacy. But it's hard to get right so that you've got both accent and developmental articulation.
Interesting.
Yeah, we developed our Canvas skill for Alexa based on this idea that students, parents, teachers want readier access to the information in their course experience, right? The things that teachers or faculty post, new announcements, assignments that are due, so on and so forth. And so on the one hand, though, we were sort of inspired by the use of these voice services inside of a house, we thought about them more ubiquitously in terms of the things that are on your phone and the availability of that. But we did quickly in the product development life cycle get into the kind of this gray area, recognizing that a lot of students will have these in their dorms or apartments in colleges and universities, and then other people, whether it's roommates or friends or acquaintances, have access to that device too. We figured that out working with the Alexa team, but it certainly was an obstacle and created a little bit of a user interface obstacle that wasn't there before.
Yeah. When you mentioned product discovery, I think one of the ways that we think about it is just information discovery. So the more personalized you can make the experience with the voice assistant in whatever mode or form it's happening in, the better path you have to not have to say Alexa, open X skill or launch X skill. You can just simply ask, what are my assignments today? What do I have due tomorrow? Or what were my last grades like? And so I think there's a lot of work to just make it continually push ourselves through partnerships and software development to really make sure that we're making it just much more natural and eliminate the words that would not naturally be occurring when you're asking a question. It's a really hard problem, but it's something that definitely we're focused on to make that information discovery both easier and more personalized.
And much less transactional, right? It always feels very like, give me this, here it is, as opposed to you're really in conversation.
Correct, yep.
To me, the discovery problem is a really big, hard problem, and it directly affects our company. About a quarter of people who are looking for third-party apps find out about it through a friend. And I bet if you went back and looked at early App Store feedback, it would be the same, like mobile App Store would be very similar. About 15% find out about third-party apps through social media, and a little bit less through the Amazon Alexa store and the Google stores. So I think, frankly, both Amazon and Google, even though it's a hard problem, both those companies are really good at solving it. And I think they have a long way to go to make discovery a lot easier. And some of the things you talked about in terms of more natural discovery would help, but I just think you have to invest more in it and make it easier to
So
find out.
are you saying that like they're hard to find because it's voice? Like, because
Well,
there's not much to see?
Yes, that's part of the problem. But also I think customers don't know. There's a huge awareness problem. A lot of customers don't know they can use their Echo with third-party apps.
Right.
And to me, that's Amazon and Google. They just, like, you remember Apple did a whole marketing campaign around there's an app for that.
Yeah, right.
It was huge. It was TV in the store, and I think Amazon and Google should be doing that. It's pretty simple. And then people would know they can look for our apps or other companies' apps, but customers don't know that it's there yet.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly discovered that adoption of the Canvas skill for Alexa didn't reach what we hoped or expected it would. There is a marketing activity that needs to happen, both by the tool providers and the service providers, to help people who are already using these tools, these voice assistants, understand what's available for them.
So Chris, do you agree with that in the first place?
We're trying to be controversial.
Is this the provocative part of the
how would you help these folks and the entrepreneurs who are here?
I think it's great feedback. I think it's our job to listen to that feedback and to do a better job, and I can't disagree with any of that feedback. I think the discovery problem, I mean, it's everything from how do you categorize and think about applications in a way that's logical and then make the discovery easier. I do think what are the actions that can be done to increase awareness? So yeah, no real objection. I hear the feedback loud and clear. And we're going to work on that.
Yeah, this question of discovery reminds me of something Rose said earlier, where we think a lot about these voice computing services as a user interface backed up by an intelligence. There's a whole nother avenue that voice computing is being used, and it's not one that we're necessarily really aware of. And the example that comes to my mind is how we pass any video that's recorded on our ARC platform into a voice computing service that automatically transcribes that, turns it into captioning, right? And that's something that you do proactively trigger when you record a video, but a lot of these services are just listening. And I've certainly met a few researchers who are interested in using that just listening capability to understand or infer emotion or understanding or whatever it might be by the learner. And I think that's where we open up some both interesting and I think scary possibilities with voice computing.
Yeah, I think listening is a really, really complex idea, because a lot of the whole principle of learning is based on, particularly a teacher-student interaction, is based on listening, and not just for the right answer. But if you think about the use case we're working on, which is, for anyone who's familiar with a K3, K2 classroom, they do running records or fluency assessments on a regular basis. This is a massive time suck. Yeah. But part of what a teacher's doing is they're listening for accuracy around the words, they're listening for kids' affect, and then they're trying to give feedback, and scaling that over time is really hard. But you've then got all of this listening data. So that's great, but what does that mean in terms of what you do with it and how you can feed it back? And so again, making it less transactional, then we can give you something useful to read depending on where you are. You can choose your assigned books without the teacher having to direct you to this basket or that. So the kinds of the benefits that come from additional listeners in a classroom, I think, can't be underestimated if you've been in any kind of chaotic primary school classrooms.
Yeah, but I think that raises some ethical questions for sure. I mean, I think somebody using a voice service at home opts in, however consciously, into that device, listening all the time. In a classroom, it's a different environment where there's some at least traditional expectations on what is and isn't recorded and how that information is used.
So how is it different from the teacher writing down the running record information or the kids clicking the button on the game, which is practicing fluency?
Yeah, I would say different from a teacher in that you have the human that you trust in that role making the decisions.
And what about different from the game?
I don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
Ian, do you have a thought on that? Like, you're dealing with
only in that it's a limited interaction. The game would be a more limited interaction.
I think it's because we put this energy and the power and emotion of voice. And so somehow the idea that we have a file, which is a kid's voice, feels somehow much more intimate and worrying than the fact we have every clickstream piece of data of this. Because is it different?
I mean, certainly the voice
I'm being
recording is
controversial
more
right now, by the way. I think it
comprehensive.
probably is.
Which is
Well,
good. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, I can speak to the fact that currently COPPA says it's different in the way that the
It does.
Child Online Privacy Protection Act is written, where I'll encourage people to go look at it, but there's clear guidance on what is a recorded voice of a child under 13 versus a clickstream. And so, and this is an area, where I think we agree it's incredibly important to be very thoughtful and to put privacy as absolutely the top requirement, and to be vigilant about protecting that privacy. But then I think you're addressing that there are some potential, that ability to listen opens doors,
Right.
very powerful doors from a learning perspective. But then also doing it in a very responsible, privacy-minded way. Like I don't think sitting here right now.
The temptation to use the data with the AI coming in, I can do whatever processing it is, and then provide more applications, more services. So that's always there's a temptation from the companies and the innovators' perspective to capitalize on that. How are you handling that?
Well, in our case, it's relatively simple. We don't get any voice data from Amazon. I mean, we don't know what the data is. It's just the way the third-party apps were set up with Amazon. But kind of just jumping off some of the things Rose and Chris were talking about, I think understand for consumers, whether those consumers are in the classroom or at home, actually understanding the facts is really important.
Yeah.
And I think the sort of popular media tends to help us inaccurately lump all tech companies in the same giant ball. They all have the same policy, and that's actually not true. I will say, as a longtime Amazon former employee, I was involved with attorneys and our CEO on how, at the time, we thought about voice and how do you protect privacy and all those issues. So I would put Amazon, and I was there for a long time, I would put Amazon in a very, very different camp in terms of privacy rights protection from a company, bluntly, like Facebook. And it's really important as consumers to not just say, they're all the same. Facebook is the same as Amazon is the same as Google. It's not true. And it's worth, if you care about privacy, thinking deeply and understanding how each company treats your data, and it's very different. So,
And that anyone who's in the field, is following COPPA, right? If you haven't read it, you probably should actually. It is, you do have to do that work, and even more so when you're going, I think, individually to schools and you're selling to government, and it's a very different barrier to entry and sort of set of responsibilities we all have, I think.
yeah, I should also emphasize, just not recording the voice data is not the only thing associated with COPPA by any stretch.
Right.
And our company is committed and absolutely follows the COPPA regulations. So, but Chris brought it up in the context of voice. That particular part of it is not an issue we have to worry about, but we do have to worry about everything else. So.
And to add a little bit of clarity, I didn't want to throw COPPA out there as like an unachievable barrier to your point. For example, using an Echo device at home has an opt-in mechanism compliant with COPPA that has a verifiable parental consent, and so understanding it's not rocket science. It's actually quite straightforward. So it's definitely achievable. And to Ian's point, certainly our view has been that the customer's data is their data. There's no action of using that data to target anyone for consumer products or our products or advertisement. And that, in fact, a lot of people don't realize that within the Alexa app on your phone, you can go in and actually have deleted any voice utterance that the system had captured before. And so it's those levels of controls are completely in each user's hands to be able to go and do that.
Fascinating. In terms of even the early stage applications, what business models are you really seeing at this point? Bamboo, what's your business model, and what maybe some of the business models you guys are looking at?
Super early in our world. We're just barely over a year old. Our first product launched last June. And so right now our goal is actually to build audience. All of our applications, Bamboo Music, Bamboo Math, and forthcoming Bamboo Reading are all free in the beginning. But we do think working with some partners, perhaps initially on the reading side, there may be like an a la carte purchase, just like you'd have on a mobile phone. You can buy like additional premium content for a small fee. Or for us, we are able to provide really good analytics for parents if they opt in to a registration model. Again, following all the rules that we need to follow. The parents can opt in, and over time, if we're building really useful data for parents, we think there may be a model to do subscription. We try to keep that subscription price pretty low, but we think the value we can provide in terms of data would be worth it.
Interesting. Any other things that you guys have seen?
For us, it's simply, the use of voice skills is simply an enhancement for the technology to keep pace with the modern world. If this is an interface that users want and look forward to or rely upon, it needs to be an interface for the tools that we provide for them.
So we are the same in terms of thinking about productivity, but the use case I described earlier is a partnership we have with Amira, which is a new startup company. I don't know if Mark's here. Really the model is formative assessment. So it's a subscription-based model, obviously by student as they use the assessment. We're obviously able to give them reading practice as well as make the assessment much simpler, easeful, and take all of hundreds and thousands of hours off a teacher's plate. So very small subscription, a lot of ROI on time.
That's pretty fascinating.
I think it's important to not think of voice as something that requires its own business model.
Okay.
I think what we
Unless
talk
it's
about,
got this use case that's about instruction or assessment that's happening.
Yeah,
right?
but I think that voice as an engagement model can be an extension of many different business models, right? And just the rate of engagement via voice is just continuing to go up. And so I think the biggest encouragement I would have for anyone in the room is if you don't have a voice strategy yet, start working on it. And then I think the other part behind that would be if you don't have a data strategy and an ML strategy to how you make that voice really smart, start working on that too. Because that'll be, I think we are past the days where a voice is just a robot reading a script. It's really more of a voice giving you insightful information that hopefully is quite personalized to you and your needs. And that is about the data behind and the machine learning that's going on around that.
We're about to hire a voice UX designer, right? So the whole role is just thinking about UI and UX for voice. You guys must have loads of them. It's a completely different. Maybe I want one. A completely different set of skills than classic graphic design into UI UX.
That's interesting. Do you have voice developers in your?
The team that developed our Alexa skill did it because they wanted to. They started it during one of our biannual hack weeks. They were interested in it, intrigued by the possibilities. And so they just did it, and we turned it into just another part of the product. We went to the next mile, then open sourced it because we knew that we would only be able to dedicate so much of our attention to enhancing it as adoption grows or the technology further becomes ubiquitous. And so we're hopeful that others will pick it up and add to it and take it to the next level.
Got it. Great. We covered the privacy paradox. I had questions around it, but I think it naturally evolved into that conversation.
Privacy
so
paradox.
it's great.
Great.
At least the key message for me is the key takeaway is it's important to be doing a responsible innovation as it relates to voice because the device is right there and you're listening in all the time, and so be responsible as you build those applications.
I do want to make one distinction. Listening all the time versus what goes into the cloud all the time, very, very different things.
Okay.
I can speak for us. Like Alexa does not actually start listening until it hears the keyword, or if you have if you actually have a microphone button on a device, you press it. So, and then the actual recording is the actual what comes after that, and then that's processed for a set of instructions and then get executed. And then that information is completely available to you through your app, and you can choose to delete if you want. But there's no moving information to the cloud unless Alexa is invoked.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's important.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, same with us. You start your avatar, who's going to listen to you read, and when your avatar finishes, we've stopped listening.
Yep.
That's good. Well, good to know. We're all responsible citizens here. So the question I have is, given that we're in sort of the early stages, right? Obviously, we're making a lot of mistakes, and what mistakes, each of you, as you went ahead trying to implement voice or build a voice applications, or maybe even seen other examples, whatever, to whatever extent, what would you say to this audience in terms of the mistakes or the learnings that you had to date at this point?
I could talk about kind of one general area of learning. If you take a team that builds applications for tablets or PCs or mobile phones, and you just say, okay, go build this voice app, I can virtually guarantee you they will build something that's at some part of the application incredibly frustrating for the end user, where the end user will try to talk to Alexa in a way that Alexa doesn't understand, and if you're not smart about it, a lot of developers will just keep repeating the same query over and over, like, would you like to turn left? And the user says, I'm not sure. And then Alexa says, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Would you like to turn left? I'm not sure. And so that, you have to really be careful about that. And it tends to be very different and really easy to get in those repetitive cycles. So doing user testing, I'm thinking really deeply about how you would like to be spoken to if, like we've all gotten in a car, those old voice systems in cars, and you try to get it to make a phone call and you just want to shoot yourself because it won't, you're just like, forget it, I'm not using this anymore. So I think that both the Amazon and Google teams did a really good job of making kind of the base systems most of the time not be frustrating. But as a third-party developer, you have to be very smart about also not being frustrating. And so that's my quick headline, I guess.
I would build on that from the piece that I think we were delightfully surprised. I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but surprised actually to really see how our customers were going to drive things forward, and in particular, how well they engaged their audience of, say, students. So I have Arizona State University, Lancaster University, Northeastern University. Pretty much all of our customers that have been successful went and sat down with the students and really understood what do they want to do. Because I can't tell you how many times we've heard to the point of the developers like, we got this killer scenario that's on campus, we're going to do this. And they're like, well, who have you talked to about that? Oh, the three of us. Oh, okay. Go talk to some students. Even to the point of, I think we were surprised by how accessible hackathons are and how really powerful of a tool that is and how it really energizes and starts building enthusiasm with the audience that you want to serve. And that's a pretty simple mechanism with how easy some of these voice skills, and it doesn't take a lot to build a voice skill actually. So I think that was a key surprising learning for us.
Interesting. Anything else you guys want to share?
Yeah, I can't think of specific mistakes that we made, but certainly pitfalls that we saw as we were going through the user-centered design process was we would hear something that seemed like a good idea, but it was pretty easy to get too far ahead of the technology. So, for example, we heard teachers say, I'd love to be able to compose a new announcement to all of my classes through the voice service. The practical reality is that depends entirely upon the voice service accurately transcribing every single word, and then you have the question of, well, how do you edit that or refine that before you actually hit post? So, there are these things that seem like really obvious, great ideas to implement into these technologies that really require thinking to the end of the line and thinking about the impact that extends beyond the actual interaction with the voice service.
And that's another good example of where hybrid interfaces make a lot of sense, right? Like one of my favorite ones to talk to other people about is show me my bank balance. You actually don't want your bank balance coming out of your phone when you're in public, right? But actually it's very quick to ask it, much easier than going through the menus, and then you can see it. So it's a good interaction between voice and screen. I would say for us, particularly given the use case I described, and I hope there's enough K3 educators in the room who maybe understand that concept or companies. If you're going to take something that is an instructor or a teacher's job today, and you're going to make it better and cooler and faster and give them back all of this time, they really need to be part of the process. And so working with teachers, looking really closely at how they do those assessments today, what they really want to get out of them, what they then do afterwards. A lot of things we've done along the line, to try and make sure that what next action is what they would do, so that they feel comfortable giving that listening that they think is so valuable, and what they bring as humans to their work, that they can trust the box.
Yep, great. We've got 5 minutes left, so I want to turn this conversation to...
This is the best moderator at ASU, by the way. This guy's on it.
So predictions, I want to think about predictions. I think so in terms of the learnings as well, like one thing that I know educators really care about is accessibility. And so when you're using new platforms, new interfaces, the biggest issue with new interfaces is accessibility. Are you really thinking about the broad spectrum and diverse set of individuals, diverse set of voices? Those are all very important, right? Now, with that said, as you think about sort of the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, each of you, I would just love to hear, how long do you think it will take for this to be meaningful in terms of lives from an education standpoint? So is education the killer app for voice, and is voice going to get us there? And if so, in what way and how long is it going to take? Just quick predictions from each of you.
I would say we'll start seeing some really interesting results in the next couple of years. Again, the way we're approaching it is we're going to parents. And I think it's way easier for us to have an influence over individual families, and hopefully those families will tell more and more families. I think that's a much easier proposition for a small company than trying to win over a school district and have them totally transform the way, let's say, early learning would work. I commend you for the effort. But I also think, in terms of accessibility, I work with nonprofits in the Seattle area. I'm super committed to making sure that what we're working on is really accessible, inexpensive. One of the things I love about the voice platforms is, certainly on sale, the least expensive ones are $20. And so that makes it a really broadly available product. And so that's exciting for us.
I would say we have the luxury of seeing sort of, what do the engagement models look like, right? Kind of behind the scenes. And I would say that the level of engagement and the increase in engagement around education style or education category apps is very encouraging, and the engagement at home as well. And so I don't think there's any question of if, it's clearly when that it'll have a significant impact on education. I think that the bigger place, I won't make year 2, 3 kind of predictions, but I would say that the breakthrough will be when things are really more personalized, and you can actually do a lot more of extending the classroom to home in a way, or dorm room in a way where it just feels very natural, and there's that bi-directional engagement. And I think that's where some of the bigger breakthroughs will happen.
One of the few things that I would be able to predict is back to your original thought, which is that accessibility will be important. And any technologist who builds just for a voice service and doesn't have an alternative UI will not succeed. Having said that, right, as these become more prevalent in our everyday lives through all of our different devices, and the device itself becomes more invisible, I think it'll be used more for productivity. And I think, as people develop new applications for the voice service, they'll have to think really hard about the effectiveness of it in the context or environment in which it's being used. Because we're basically saying, you can use this anywhere. That doesn't mean that's the best location for you to be doing deep learning or assessment or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I don't think we're trying to transform everything about how K3 learning works. I think the huge opportunity is extending the arm of the teacher, extending her ability to reach students. I mean, any teacher, you think about how many of us are here, is being asked to do so much with something that's not changing, which is time. And so anything that we can do to empower the teacher through the multiple interfaces. But if you really think about it, I have a huge amount of hope in voice, because if you go into a classroom and you really look around, there's the interface is the physical space and the teacher's voice and the kids' voices. And that is really where learning is happening and being demonstrated. So both for assessment and for teaching, I think there's huge opportunity.
That's fantastic. So, with that said, also, when you think about sort of the future, it's a combination. What I consistently heard, start with the customer. Whether it is the consumer, whether it is the learner, whether it is the teacher, start with the customer. And also, I think what I heard is at least voice is not a standalone experience by itself, but just really think about sort of the workflow for the teacher or the learner or the consumer, and think about how you integrate and use voice as a way to really elevate those experiences. I think that seems like the key messages today. And then also, there's tremendous opportunity, obviously, right? We're talking about billions of devices here. And so we will find, I don't think we thought like the first smartphone came up, like camera is going to be the killer app at the end of the day. And it just kind of displaced all the point and shoot cameras, right? So who knows? So I don't think we've really answered the future question per se, but
we got
I
people
think there's a lot of
excited.
opportunity here. All right, thank you very much. Give a shout out for this STM panel.